I'm Drew Stevenson, and this is a quick explainer video about the civil service versus the spoils system. This is designed for my administrative law students, and we're talking about federal regulatory agencies and filling those spots for who's going to run those agencies and who's going to work in those agencies. This is a subset of a larger body of law about presidential appointment powers. So in your administrative law class, we usually do a unit on how the president can control the agencies. And of course, there's lots of executive orders and memoranda and things like that. The president has some power to set and order agencies to take policy. But one of the main ways that the Constitution ensures the president's control of the executive branch is the ability to appoint the top people in the agency to carry out the president's policy agenda. So let's go back to our slides. So in terms of the Constitution, you should be thinking about the Appointments Clause. The Appointments Clause requires that high-level officers of the United States be appointed through nomination by the president with Senate confirmation. Sometimes this is easy if the Senate is from the same political party as the president, but if they're from a different party, and there's a lot of political brinksmanship going on, the Senate might refuse to confirm some of the president's nominees. So sometimes this is an easy process. If it's a kind of a low stakes or low profile appointee, the Senate might just confirm a lot of the president's appointees. And other times this becomes very controversial and politicized. Who are we talking about? Well, the president's cabinet. So secretary of this or that agency, those are usually cabinet positions. Other agencies, we usually call the top person a director or sometimes the administrator, and sometimes commissioners or board members. And on the boards and commissions agencies, think about like the Federal Reserve Board, the Federal Trade Commission, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and the National Labor Relations Board. There's a lot of agencies that are commissions and boards. There will also usually be a chair. And so sometimes the president nominates someone to be the chair of the committee or board. Keep in mind, though, that most of the workers at federal agencies are civil servants. And so they're not picked by the president. They're not at-will employees of the president. They're covered by the Civil Service Reform Act and the Pendleton Act. In other words, typically, and we have a special exception for those independent agencies, but for the default rule is that the top people in the executive branch at these agencies serve at the president's they're at-will employees or at the president's pleasure, and so the president can fire them and then replace them, but we'll have to go through Senate confirmation. But that's not true for the tens of thousands of people that work for these agencies. And I hope you can see from a political standpoint that this is, even though presidents promise bold initiatives and change and things like that when they're running for office, the vast majority of the people who carry out the day-to-day tasks of governing or running the federal bureaucracy or deep state or whatever you want to call it, these administrative agencies, they were there before the current president. They're going to be there long after the current president. And so they're there for a long time. And again, the president is picking the top people who can set the agenda, who can reorganize the agency and so forth, but not the majority of people that work there. Now, in the old days, we had something called the spoils system, or sometimes referred to as the political patronage. And for the first 100 years of our country's history, basically until after the Civil War, we used this system, and so did most of the other countries in the world, to be honest, and some continued to do this into the 20th century. The phrase, the spoils system, comes from the old saying, to the victors go the spoils. It's not about spoiling things, it's about spoils in the sense of we won, so we should get to do what we want. And the idea was that whoever won the White House could replace basically any federal employee or official, let's say, with somebody that they wanted, which was usually from the same party or who had personal loyalty to the president. This had downsides, as you can imagine. The first is that there was a massive turnover in the federal government every time a new party won the White House. And right, so the president just starts purging everyone from the federal government from the other political party and giving jobs to people who worked for the campaign, donated to the campaign, people the president owes a favor to, and so forth. And this meant that we had this massive disruption. There was no institutional memory, like no consistency or experience. Imagine going to start your first day on the job, and every other person who works there, it's also their first day on the job. So when you ask, like, where are the office supplies? No one knows. When you say, who do I talk to about this to get a signature? No one knows. And this is what would happen, is that we would have kind of chaos every time a new party took over the White House, because so many people would just cycle out and then new people cycle back in. This, by the way, can have a ripple effect on the economy. Imagine you're part of a regulated industry like the railroads or the banks, and every time a new party wins the White House, nobody in the agency that is your oversight or regulation has any idea what they're doing or remembers how things, the agreements or rules from last year, or they don't know the people in the industry, and so forth. Also, keep in mind that the appointees were based on either personal loyalty or campaign donations and contributions. And this had the unfortunate effect of, we had a lot of people running the federal government for the first 100 years of our history who lacked experience, were completely inexperienced and incompetent. Sometimes they were illiterate. Sometimes they had no idea what their agency even did or anything about it. And they would find themselves with this, rewarded for their campaign work with this cushy government job that they had no idea how to do. So we had completely incompetent people in a lot of these positions, or people that were completely unmotivated, who didn't show up to work or had no reason to get anything done, because they weren't given the job because anybody thought they would be good at it. They were given the job because somebody owed them a political favor. Also, this is a little counterintuitive, but the spoils system or patronage system, it seems like, according to political scientists, incentivizes bribery and government corruption. And so people would pay bribes to get the positions. And this could be before someone comes into office in the form of a campaign contribution or donation. But let's say you missed your chance for that and you've decided, I'd really like a government job. You could just bribe the president or bribe someone on the president's staff, the White House staff, to kind of put your name in to get an appointment. So people would bribe their way into these positions. And then once they were there, they would demand bribes from everybody who wanted them to issue a permit or approve an application or renew a license or things like that. Whatever their agency's job was, they would demand bribes. And so there's a famous story about Teddy Roosevelt's father wanting to be the administrator of Ellis Island and handle immigration so that he could reform it, because we'd had a generation of Ellis Island being run by people that were completely corrupt and would take basically charge bribes to let people through. And so the idea is that this sort of patronage system ends up creating much more prevalent government corruption. So in the 1880s, after the Civil War, Congress passed the Pendleton Act, and then we in the 20th century started to expand and revise this. The Pendleton Act initially applied to very few federal positions, and now it applies to most of the people that the Civil Service Reform Act that work for the federal government. And so I'm going to just hit the highlights. Obviously, this is a very big area of law, and if you're going to do employment law, you should know that the federal government is probably the biggest employer in the United States. So if you're doing employment law, there's a good chance, and you're representing employees, some of them are going to be government employees, and you will need to learn a lot about this. For administrative law students, I'm going to hit the quick and dirty details that you might need to know for an exam. So first, the civil service employees have some job security against political firing. So if you work for OSHA or the Environmental Protection Agency or the Federal Trade Commission, you don't have to worry that just because somebody from the other political party has won the White House in an election that you're going to get fired, and you can stay at your job. And so we're not going to purge everybody from the other political party or have these types of political firings. You have a lot of job security. By the way, there's an idea here that the job security also ends up being a perk, so you can attract more talented people to work for the government, because there's a lot of people who value job security in the same way that other people might value a higher salary. Also, hirings and promotions are based on either experience or seniority and credentials and job performance. And so if you are working for the federal government and you put in a new position opens up above you and you put in for that job, they may give a lot of weight to the person who's been at the agency the longest, who has the most seniority or the most experience in that area or has done comparable jobs. Some government positions actually require that you have a degree to get to a certain pay grade. So they may require a college degree or a master's degree, or in some agencies, a law degree. And so that's the credentials idea. They may give favoritism on the civil. There's an exam you take, the civil service exam, and they curve your score upwards if you are a veteran and so forth, and job performance. So the Civil Service Act allows people to be promoted or not if they're good at their job and achieve a lot and so forth. Also, we're going to have firing only for good cause. In other words, we can't just fire you because you look like a liberal or you act kind of conservative. We need to show that you did something wrong. You are showing up late for work every day. You missed deadlines. You punched your supervisor in the face. Something like that, that is actually a grounds for termination of some sort of malfeasance or neglect. Otherwise, you're going to have your job. So it's not absolute job security. You have to do your work, right? But it's a little bit, it's supposed to be protection against political firings. Now, there are some downsides to this system too, and Hollywood likes to make fun of bureaucrats. This is a picture of a Vogon from the movie Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Um, and so one of the downsides of this idea of professional civil servants is that it dilutes the effect of the presidential party platform or the president's campaign promises. Again, presidents, like when they're running for election, like to promise like the world, right? Like it's a utopia. We're gonna change everything, right? And the fact is that this isn't change you can believe in. We're not gonna really drain the swamp. Most of the people that were working there before the president took office are gonna be there after this president is gone. They were there before, they're gonna be there for a long time. And so this ends up kind of blunting the impact of a party or a president who's a visionary or makes lots of promises, because you have a bipartisan workforce. Now, they're not going to disobey orders. And remember, the president can put his or her appointee as the head of the agency who can order subordinates. Look, we're doing this, we're adopting this program or this policy, and you're going to have to go along with it. On the other hand, you have the people that are kind of the boots on the ground, or the hands-on workers that are doing the day-to-day work of the agency, have been there a long time. They're going to be there a long time. They've been there through administrations from both parties, and they may not share the same enthusiasm for the current administration's policies. Also, and this is related, you can get an entrenched federal bureaucracy. These are career civil servants. They may spend their whole career working for that government agency. And that could be a good thing because it gives people a lot of experience and specialization. They may get good at doing certain things and efficient. On the other hand, if you do the same thing for a long time, you might tend to get a little bit of tunnel vision or get complacent in the position. or have some of your bad habits become kind of like really deeply ingrained. And so there are concerns or complaints about the entrenched federal bureaucracy, or that maybe we need to get fresh blood in there and take some of the new jobs. This is a picture from Monsters, Inc. that if the last one didn't look familiar to you, you may remember Roz from your childhood. Um, and so another complaint that's often raised against the Pendleton Act or the civil service or government bureaucracy in general is the lack of market incentives and lack of market discipline. And we're typically talking about money. So if you think about it, the idea here is that in the free market is going to reward whoever's the best company, the people who work the hardest or have the smartest ideas, or and so forth, that you're more likely to succeed and get rich. And so if you're slow or make an inferior product or don't have good customer service, you might find yourself going out of business or in bankruptcy. And this trickles down to the workforce, right? So an employer has motivation, a financial interest in having productive and smart and effective workers. And so if you're unproductive or ineffective or not very good at your job or lazy, you might find yourself fired. And the complaint is that if you take away the financial incentive, then workers will be lazy and slow and inefficient and difficult and so forth, and unmotivated. Now, there's a controversy about this, right? And the counter argument, as you can imagine, is I don't want the people who are governing me, who have power over me, to have personal ambition and greed and a financial stake in what's happening. I want them to be public servants and to act in the public interest and so forth. So maybe we actually don't want market incentives when it comes to government workers and regulators and so forth. But again, this is the stereotype, is that the federal, longtime federal government employees are going to be like Roz here and kind of get entrenched and be unmotivated and unpleasant to deal with. Okay, that concludes our quick little lecture about the spoils system and what we've replaced it with, which is the civil service.